Alright, so we are about halfway through the iPhone 16 life cycle, other than the iPhone 16e, which just recently got released. We're about 6 months in, and if you want to create some sort of video content or even photography content, the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max is a great place to start. This year, Apple really brought a lot of new tech to the iPhone 16 camera. It is way better than cameras we've seen in previous years, and it is seriously worth considering if you want to get into an entry-level position when it comes to video and photography. Now, because I've had the iPhone 16 since launch, I have really had a lot of time to play around with different settings and find what I think are the perfect settings for recording and video and taking photos when I'm out and about. Now, just like driving a car, you wouldn't go and drive a car without knowing how to drive, and same as taking videos and shooting photos on the iPhone. You're not gonna just pick it up and start doing it. So I wanna give you guys my personal tips on what I think are the best settings for the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max. So to start, you're gonna wanna go into settings and then go to the camera section, and the first thing that's gonna pop up is the camera control. This is where you can change how your camera control button works. Personally, I have hardly used camera control at all. I think it was kind of a useless innovation, but Apple had to do something with their phone. They couldn't just make the iPhone 15 Pro Max with new tech in it. So I leave all of these settings as they are. If you don't like having the button be a single click, you can change that to a double click, or you can even change what the button does. Now, it is completely personal preference. It doesn't change your photos at all. It still functions the exact same when you're actually within the camera app. So take that as you will. I personally don't touch those settings at all. After the camera control, you get to the photographic styles. Now, if you're looking to do any sort of photography with the iPhone, I would highly recommend just leaving those alone, because what you're going to be doing mostly is recording and shooting in Pro Raw Max. And I would highly recommend that you don't shoot with the photographic styles, because when you shoot with photographic styles, you are basically just baking on an edit, and you can't undo that when you're later on in Lightroom. If you take a raw photo and put it into Lightroom, you could create all those same effects in Lightroom with a little bit of effort, and you would come out with the same photo, but then you have more control over it. Now, obviously, if you want to get a quick photographic style, you can do that. Just know that later on down the line, you're not going to be able to change the edits that you made when you actually took the picture. Now, when it comes to recording in video, I would highly suggest changing these settings. I believe they come standard as 1080p, and this phone can record in 4K, so definitely go in and change your recording settings. I record at 4K 60 for my videos because it can record at 4K 60. You don't need an external hard drive for that. It's worth doing, and you don't really need to go to 4K 120 on a normal video. You can go to 4K 120 in your slow-mo. I would highly recommend it. It will take up a lot of space. However, you will get some really buttery smooth slow-mo videos. I would also recommend shooting in some sort of 4K for the cinematic. I think the cinematic actual filming setting is really cool. It's a really nice feature to have. It adds a pretty cool tone to your videos. It uses the cinematic spatial audio feature, and then also uses some pretty nice depth of field with the camera. And I actually really like this setting. I kind of wish I shot in it more, but it is definitely worth switching to 4K and recording in some sort of 4K. When it comes to recording and sound, definitely record with spatial audio. If you are wanting to create any sort of video, the spatial audio feature will definitely give you way better sound in your videos, and it gives you way more control over the sound in your videos. The iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max come with microphones on this side, in the front and in the back, and when you record, it records on all of the microphones, which allows you to use the cool spatial audio mix. And if you're doing strictly editing on the phone, you can get some pretty decent audio editing just from the iPhone 16. Now, when it comes to formats, you are going to want to go into this because there are some settings you'll probably want to change, or at least make sure are turned on. When it comes to the storage choice, I would go for high efficiency. High efficiency just makes it a lot easier to send photos, and it is honestly just better. You'll kind of get a better experience by choosing high efficiency. Definitely choose photo mode to be 24 megapixels. That is just the camera when you aren't shooting in ProRAW, so have that set at 24 megapixels. It will only give you a higher quality picture in the end. And make sure you have ProRAW enabled, because that is one of the biggest things about this phone. That's what really turns it into a content creation machine, and it allows you to create photos that are worth looking at and worth your time. Now, enable ProRAW Max, it is so worth it. It does take up obviously more space with each because it uses a 48 megapixel camera. However, you will get a way better image by using ProRAW. When it comes to the ProRes defaults tab, make sure you go in there because you need to enable ProRAW Max. ProRAW Max is what allows you to shoot in 48 megapixel. It allows you to really take in all of the details in whatever scene you're shooting. Now, when it comes to the actual storage option, I would go for the JPEG XL Lossy. The lossless version is going to take up a lot of space on your phone. The JPEG XL Lossy is actually pretty small. When you look at the other options, it will show you kind of how much space it approximately will take up. And the JPEG XL Lossy still looks super good in pretty much any setting you take a photo in. Now, moving on to the preserve settings, I would just go in and turn every single preserve setting on other than photographic styles, because you're probably not going to be using them, or if you are using them, you don't want to pull your phone out and have a photographic style still applied that you don't want. If it's something you need to take a picture of really quickly, that could ruin your image. So turn everything on. It's definitely worth keeping your settings all the same, so that way you're not constantly having to go in, change your settings just so you can get the shot you want. You can have your phone set to how you like to take photos, and you are good to go. Now, moving on down, I would go to the composition section. Make sure you turn on the grid and the level. You don't want your photos to be all crooked, and the grid is really important because if you know a little bit about photography, or if you're trying to learn, you'll definitely learn about the rule of thirds, and the grid allows you to learn and use that rule of thirds, and it is able to help you place whatever you want in your foreground and background appropriately so it looks appealing to the eyes. Now, when it comes to viewing outside of the frame, I like to turn that off because I just don't really need to see what's outside of the frame. I want to see what I'm taking a photo of and nothing more. Moving on to the Fusion camera, you can go in there and turn on both of those. Definitely have the 24mm lens as your default lens though, and then you can have the option of tapping on the 1x icon, and it does a 1 and then 1.2 and 1.5. It's more or less just a way for you to zoom in to set presets instead of having to use the little slide to slide over to 1.2 or 1.5, kind of like how you can go to 2 or 5x. Now, when it comes to portraits in photo mode, I like to shoot with this turned on. It allows you to take pictures in the not portrait mode, and it will still allow you to add a depth of field if it notices that there's some sort of person or even an object in frame that it thinks would be a portrait image. So it's more or less just giving you more control over settings when you take pictures. When you go on to the prioritize faster shooting, I would highly suggest turning this off. Now, what you're going to notice is when you're taking pictures, it might take a little bit longer in between each picture. However, this is taking in the full amount of data. It is taking a full photo, and it is not losing any data. If you turn on prioritize faster shooting, you're going to notice that you could take pictures really fast, but it's going to compress and you're going to lose data in those later photos because the phone is trying to keep up with you wanting to just spam photos. So it won't capture all of the data because it's trying to move on to taking the next picture. Definitely turn on lens correction, otherwise you're kind of going to notice that little like fisheye weird look when you're taking pictures in something like 0.5x. You can take some really funny pictures in 0.5x, and I would definitely recommend just playing around with it for fun, but turn lens correction on. And then I like to have macro control turned on because sometimes when you get really close to the camera, it will think you're trying to take a macro shot, or if there's something placed in your actual image, it was really weird. So make sure you have that turned on because that gives you the option to turn macro control off, and it allows you to just take a normal photo without taking a macro photo. So definitely something to keep in mind. I think that the macro settings in the iPhone are actually really frustrating and they're really annoying because whenever I want to just take a normal picture, sometimes it thinks it's just a macro, and you can just tap the button to turn it off, but it's more or less just I'd rather have a button to turn it on than have to turn it off every time. Now, when you actually move on to the camera app itself, make sure that you go in and turn on Pro Raw Max. When you actually see it, it might look like it has a slash through it. Tap that so that way it actually shows Pro Raw, not crossed out. That means you're shooting in the full Pro Raw 48 megapixel max shot. And then also, I would recommend going over to your exposure and bring that down by 0.3. iPhones tend to really overexpose everything, and it's kind of annoying, but if you just turn it down by 0.3 and you keep your preserve settings on, you will always just have your exposure slightly turned down, and it will take a lot better photos in my opinion. Now, I like to shoot without night mode on. I think night mode is kind of an annoying feature. It's a great feature if you have something like a tripod, but if you're out and about, night mode can create really blurry and really kind of annoying images. And sometimes you don't want to be shooting in night mode. Sometimes you just want your picture to be dark. So I turn the night mode setting off, but you can turn it on if you want that as an option. I do think the night mode camera is super cool when you have the opportunity to use it. I actually played around with it when I was in Hawaii back a few months ago, and I got some really cool images of the night sky. It's basically just a long exposure photo, and it actually turns out pretty good as long as the phone isn't moving. If the phone starts moving, you get a lot of blurriness and it doesn't look good at all. Now, this is just a personal tip, but I would recommend shooting in 0.5, 1, or 5x, and then cropping from there. If you wanted to take a 2x image, for example, shoot in the 1x lens and then crop it to what would be 2x, because the actual zooms from 1 to 5 are just a digital zoom. It's kind of like on Snapchat. If you zoom in, you're not actually like changing lenses, you're just zooming in on the image that's actually there. So you might as well take the full image and then crop it down to what you want. It looks better, you have more data, and then also you're kind of able to control your scene just a little bit more. And then finally, if you want to keep live photos on, you can definitely do so, but it does take up a little bit of extra space. I shoot without live photos on because I don't feel like I need to have a small video for every photo I take, so that's just a personal preference, really. Overall, these are really just suggestions, and I would highly recommend that you play around with whatever settings you want to adjust and find what actually works for you. However, I think if you look around, a lot of people will probably share similar or almost exact settings like I do, because it is just kind of what seems to work. And if you find something that works for you, use what works for you. At the end of the day, it's your phone and they're your pictures and your videos. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.